Okay, in this presentation, which is the New Patreon series number 20 of the pre-Christian teachings of Jesus, of Yeshua, we're going to examine how Yeshua's proclamation of the new humanity differs from other visions of the human future and is vitally relevant today. First, a little background about the cultural role of myth, storytelling, and prophecy. Uh, Cultural visions or understanding of past and future has always been created or developed by storytelling. The keepers and tellers of family and ancestral history were originally tribal shamans and bards. And the stories were later written and expanded by poets like Homer. History is always a story written from the perspective of winners and survivors. It's not an accurate representation of the past. The stories that humanity tells to itself shapes its view of the past and its expectations for the future. And this is also true of individuals, how we remember our childhoods and previous events. Our cultural and personal memories are not objective facts. They are mythic interpretations from one perspective. Now, the Hebrew Bible, or the so-called Old Testament, was compiled and spun from the perspective of the Judahite royalty and priesthood that was taken captive and transported wholesale over to Babylon during the period of the Babylonian captivity, beginning in the 6th century BC. And it was those people that assembled, edited, and spun all the writings we have of the Old Testament into their particular point of view, which was very different than the point of view of the earlier northern kingdom of Israel. The stories of the Hebrew Bible present the patriarchal henotheism of Judah and Jerusalem, which were the surviving southern kingdom, from the perspective of the Deuteronomic reform of Josiah after the destruction of Israel, in which he ordered that all of the Asherah and all of the forms of worship that had existed in all of Israel for the past be removed from the Jerusalem temple and elsewhere, and that a new form of patriarchal Yahwism should be incorporated in the kingdom. The Old Testament history, so-called, is really a collection of legends, stories, songs, and moral sermons of prophets and Near Eastern proverbs from one narrow perspective, guided by anachronistic Deuteronomic judgments of who were the good kings and who were the bad kings of Israel and Judah. We can learn the true history and the worship and daily life of all Israel only through critical analysis of biblical texts, coupled with archaeology and the records of Egyptian, Assyrian, and Babylonian courts, where we find that Yahweh was one of many local gods and had a wife that was worshipped as Asherah. The apocalypses, that is, the visions of the heavens and the angels and the human future, are stories that begin to be told after about 200 BC in writings attributed to the later minor prophets Deutero and Trito Isaiah and the Enochian and other intertestamental pseudepigraphic and apocryphal literature. The later apocalyptic literature was important to Yeshua and his disciples and all messianic groups. The Basor of Yeshua was distorted and lost in the traditional gospel proclaimed by Christianity. But both Yeshua's Basor and the Christian gospel are ultimately stories. But I and other scholars like Bishop Spong have argued that the gospel of Christianity is an obsolete myth, a childhood story in critical need of reform. the Christian gospel of salvation has radically shaped Western history. The Basor of Yeshua is far superior and much more appropriate for 21st century people than the gospel of Christianity. Why? Because it focuses upon the vision of a future spiritually mature humanity, the new heavens, the new earth, and stewardship of the new humanity, and not just upon personal salvation from damnation. In this presentation, we will review the background of Yeshua's prophetic teaching in Jewish nationalistic messianic expectation, show how he developed that vision into one that is vitally relevant to all humanity, compare it with Hellenistic, Hindu, Buddhist, medieval, and other utopian, and dystopian visions of a human future, and notice that there's a difference between utopian with an EU and utopian with a U. And we shall show why Yeshua's view remains uniquely relevant for 21st century spirituality. So let's take a look and kind of review Yeshua's Basor of the Malkuth, his proclamation of the divine sovereignty in its Jewish context. The Basor, or prophetic public proclamation, what Yeshua spoke in public to people as a prophet, was that the Malkuth, or sovereignty of God, is starting to appear on earth with the advent of the Bar Enosh, the new humanity, what is translated in the New Testament as the Son of Man. Now, Yeshua's proclamation expanded upon the Basar of John the Baptist, which was mostly a proclamation that divine judgment was coming and that repentance or teshuvah through baptism was necessary. But Yeshua went farther than this. He expanded upon that. He took the consequences of that into their final prophetic vision as given by the book of Daniel and other things that were terribly important from the apocalyptic tradition. He used the term Bar Enosh, or son of man, or mankind, son of humanity, new humanity. He did not use the term Messiah, Mashiach. He did not use that term as John the Baptist would have. Now, his version of the Malkuth of God, or of the heavens, was the same as the advent of the Son of Man, the advent of the new humanity. And this is what would ultimately bring in the Messianic age spoken about by Deutero-Isaiah, the new age of Messiah, the new golden age of humanity, the Olam Haba, the Tikkun Olam, the time and space where the wolf would lie down with the lamb and a golden age would appear. This was not a pie in the sky, a heavenly reward, but this was a bringing of paradise onto the earth. It was a bringing in of a new heavens and a new earth and a new humanity. Well, what will the Messianic age look like according to Jewish sages contemporary with Yeshua? Well, it's a time of great plenty and great prosperity, but it does not include the idea of the Bar Enosh, or what the Christians would later call the Christ, of the new humanity in the sense that Yeshua brought it for us. But let's take a look at their idea of the Messianic age. To do that, you might want to review the Pre-Christian Patreon Series number 1, which was Yeshua's prophetic vision of the future of humanity. The pre-Christian visions of the sages concerning the Messianic age can be found in the Babylonian Talmud and many other places, but here in Tractate Ketubot, folio 111a. Such things as our rabbis taught: there will be a time when wheat will rise as high as a palm tree and will grow on the top of the mountains. There will be a time when the grain of wheat will be as large as two kidneys of a big bull, a cabbage so large that we ascended and descended it by means of a ladder. These kinds of allegorical, hypothetical statements are the ideas of what this new age would be, when the lamb would lie down with the wolf and so on. The world to come is not like this world. In this world there is the trouble of harvesting and treading of the grapes, but in the world to come a man will bring one huge grape on a wagon or a ship, put it in the corner of his house, and use its contents as if it had been a large wine cask. And this was also taught by other contemporary first century Jewish sages who were again contemporaries of Yeshua, such as Hillel of Babylon, whom Yeshua quoted, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the founder of Rabbinic Judaism, Rabbi Akiba, who was a saint and martyr and a student of ben Zakkai, Philo of Alexandria, who was a prolific first century Jewish mystic who leaves us lots of information that's very useful for us to understand many of the teachings of Yeshua. But Yeshua's radical innovation, and the thing that is terribly important, is the idea of a new humanity that will inherit the sovereignty or Malkuth of God and exercise stewardship over a new heavens and a new earth, just as the original Adam was supposed to exercise stewardship by tilling the fields of the trees, tending to the trees of the Garden of Paradise. And this would come about through the appearance of this new humanity as a new people upon the earth. Yeshua's interpretation of Daniel 7:27, which follows the very famous prophecy of the Bar Enosh, or one like unto a son of man, appearing before the throne of God and receiving all sovereignty, that explains what the Bar Enosh was, is found in Daniel 7:27, and his interpretation was based on the Aramaic text, not on the Greek Septuagint, which was the basis for Christian Davidic Messiah equals Christ equals Jesus. And here's what it says in Aramaic: and the sovereignty, or Malkuth, and the mastery, which comes from the root shalat, and the spiritual greatness, which comes from the root rav, of the sovereignties, which means the angelic sovereignties, because the archangels and angels are in charge of all these forms of stewardship, under all the heavens, is given to the people of the saints of the Most High. This is the meaning of the corporate meaning of Bar Enosh, the new humanity. And it's given to them as an everlasting sovereignty that all angelic dominions, and that again is from the word shalat, serve and obey. And this idea that the new humanity would command the angels and so on is something we discussed in an earlier presentation, and it was the root of some of the ideas that came out later with angel magic and so on. The ideas of the Christian mage and sorcerer. Now, Yeshua's vision of a future spiritually evolved humanity in earth that it will redeem is important to again review. Yeshua taught the gradual spiritualization envisioned in the book of Jubilees. For example, in the mashal or parable of the mustard seed, which tells us that the coming of the Malkuth is a long, slow process, like the growth from the tiniest of all seeds into the largest of all bushes, that shelters all the birds of the heavens and there's a great allegorical meaning in that. Um, Now, we also looked in an earlier presentation of Irenaeus quoting Papias, who was the one who recorded from live people who had been students of Yeshua what Yeshua said. And this is what he says the Lord Yeshua used to teach about those times. That would be the times in the future of the New Age and so on. That the days will come when vines will grow, each having 10,000 shoots, and on each shoot 10,000 branches, etc. You can read this. I have put this in a previous presentation, and and Yeshua said these prophecies are trustworthy for those who are faithful, and those who live until those times will see it. And so the implication was not that those times were coming right now, but they would be in a future time. This is again a davar, a prophetic word or vision that's not meant to be taken literally, but to point to an unseen reality. It says that in the future, a spiritually evolving humanity will become stewards and protectors of the earth and friends of its species, and will create great peace and prosperity in contrast to the austere life and resources that were available to a first century Palestinian Jew. Today, in the 21st century, humanity has developed much of this potential. A lot of this, uh, a lot of this age to come is already here. It has already come. Here are the giants, fruits, and vegetables and grains prophesied by Yeshua. Great fields of grains, gigantic strawberries and watermelons and other kinds of squash and so on. We have developed these kinds of agricultural things that were so important to the first century Palestinian Jews who had to scratch out their crops on in dry soil and so on. We have developed all this stuff now. So part of these prophecies are already true. And this is an important thing to note as we will move forward with the comparison of Yeshua's utopia, utopia, a good place, with later ideas of utopias and eventually ideas of a new species of humanity. Now, we also took you through the petition of the Lord's Prayer asking for a foretaste and vision of the Messianic age. It refers to our bread of the future. I'll just quickly review it. The English Lord's Prayer says, "Grant us this day our daily bread," which is kind of ridiculous because Yeshua told people not to pray for their daily bread or their food or what they're going to wear. The Aramaic Lord's Prayer says, "Grant us this day our bread of the morrow," the lechem mahar. The Greek word rendered daily is in hapax legomenon. It occurs nowhere else in all of Greek literature, has no definition, and it was speculatively and incorrectly rendered as daily because people didn't know what it meant in Greek, the early Christians who had only the Greek. But Yeshua taught not to pray for daily necessities because, quote, "your Abba already knows your needs." The Greek epiousion, it turns out, equals the Aramaic mahar, or future, the olam haba, or messianic age. So we have fragments of the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic quoted by the church fathers who had access to the lost writings of the Ebionites and other Aramaic-speaking Jewish Christians with their own pre-Christian Aramaic Jesus traditions, and the church fathers found that the original Aramaic word in the Lord's Prayer was mahar, meaning of the future, of the morrow, and this refers to the Messianic age. So Yeshua's view of the coming Malkuth on earth is summarized in this way. The Malkuth is already appearing on earth through the advent of the Bar Enosh in the person of Yeshua and the spiritual, ethical rebirth of his disciples, his Yeladim, his little children. Each disciple liberates himself or herself from hub, the consequences of sin, karma. He cannot completely untie oneself from one's karma. One can mitigate the consequences of that karma. And he or she rebirths himself or herself into the new human archetype, the Bar Enosh, through teshuvah, through turning back to God. The word repentance is often the translation that's used, but it does not mean feeling guilty or feeling sorry for who you are or anything like that. It simply means turning back to unity and union with Godhead, and through faithful practice of the halakha of spiritual rebirth, all the practices that Yeshua prescribes. A spiritually evolving humanity will become stewards and protectors of the earth and friends of its species, and will create great peace and prosperity. There is no divine judgment or destruction of the world. The world and the earth are valued. There's no Pauline rapture to escape from our world. Humanity would eventually walk in the high spiritual consciousness of the immanent divine presence. The Advent is similar to the view of the Book of Jubilees summarized by Charles, as we've shown before. The Malkuth, or Tikkun, or Messianic age, would be gradually realized on earth, and the transformation of physical nature would go hand in hand with the ethical transformation of man until there was a new heaven and a new earth. Thus finally all sin and pain would disappear, and men would live to the age of 1,000 years in happiness and peace, and after death enjoy a blessed immortality in the spirit world. That is Charles' summary of what the view of the Book of Jubilees is. And this is the view of the coming of Malkuth that Yeshua took. The Book of Jubilees was written about at the same time as the apocalyptic literature began to appear, about BC 200, in the so-called intertestamental apocryphal pseudepigraphical tradition. However, the first stage of this advent is prolonged like a pregnancy, and it leads to what are called the birth pangs of Messiah, and in Christian terms begins with the crucifixion, persecution, and the prophesied destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. So these things, as the early writers of the New Testament who wrote epistles pointed out, where you were not to be surprised at these trials and things that appeared, because this was in fact prophesied. The birth pangs of Messiah would bring much suffering and a great deal of destruction and suffering of the righteous. So the crucifixion of Yeshua was understood to be part of this period of time, the birth pangs of Messiah. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70 were understood to be part of this period of the birth pangs of Messiah. Yeshua's prophecy, for nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be earthquakes in diverse places, and there shall be famines and troubles. These are the beginnings of the birth pangs. Except the birth pangs went on for a heck of a lot longer than anybody ever thought. The growth of evil will occur alongside the evolution of the saints. For example, we have the mashal, or so-called parable of the wheat and the tares, that the wheat, which is desirable, and the weeds or tares grow side by side, and they are not, the tares can't be pulled out because to do so would damage the wheat. But so they grow side by side. The world is like a checkerboard of black and white until the final harvest and the marriage banquet of Messiah, which are allegorical, Kabbalistic, allegorical descriptions of something that cannot be described really in physical language or physical words. So now let's take a look at utopias, and dystopias. Some definitions. A utopia is from the Greek word eu, meaning good, topia, place, is a good or blessed place. Here's a fanciful drawing of a utopia, good or fanciful place. There is peace, there is plenty, and so on. A utopia is from the Greek word that means no place. Utopia, no place. Thomas More, for example, in AD 1516, wrote his Utopia and described it as an island and a place where everything was culturally peaceful and productive. And then there is a dystopia, which is a bad or evil place, a place that is not does not promote human happiness and health and welfare, a place that is destructive and destroyed. These are the three terms we're going to be using. So we're going to compare Yeshua's utopia, which was not a no place, but a place that was expected to come into and transform, be part of a transformation of humanity in the earth. We're going to compare that to earlier utopias, which were ideal places that were no place really or expected to come, and dystopias. First, before the time of Yeshua, in his Republic and in his laws, Plato described one of the earliest conceptions of a utopian society ruled by philosopher kings and guardians. The guardians were trained in four virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. They also suggest that the second part of the guardian's education should be in gymnastics. With physical training, they'll be able to live without needing frequent medical attention, and physical training will help prevent illness and weakness. In summary, Socrates asserts that both male and female guardians be given the same education, that all wives and children be shared, and that ownership of private property ought to be prohibited amongst them. Now that sounds very similar to what later we find among Jewish spiritual sects, the early Christians, for example. No private property, and that all people were had things in common. Until age 18, the would-be guardian should be engaged in basic intellectual study and physical training, followed by 2 years of military training. Next, they receive 10 years of mathematics until age 30, and then 5 years of dialectic training. And the guardians then spend the next 15 years as leaders, trying to lead people from the cave. And here we're talking about the allegory of the cave. This is what I have on the side. We have the idea of the ideal state and the ideal human in Platonic terms. And there are basically three levels of humans, or of new humans. There's those who are highly educated and act with reason, and there are those who defend, and they are soldiers and they act with courage, and then there are those who are workers and they act based on the appetite for good food and things like that to produce the food of the kingdom and so on. So upon reaching age 50, these guardians are then fully aware of the form of good and totally mature and ready to become leaders, like senators and so on. Now, let's talk about the allegory of the cave. Plato hypothesized uh, an allegorical cave under the earth in which people are chained like prisoners to look straight ahead in order to see the shadows of objects reflected on the wall of the cave. Today we might see, say, people glued to their television sets, looking at virtual images of things, being indoctrinated into certain kinds of ways of thought, being told news from a certain perspective that may not be true, and things like this. So here's the condition of humanity and human consciousness, says Plato. But a philosopher who look farther and look beyond and look more deeply into the reality of things discovers that they're inside a cave, and he finds an opening. And so he ascends out of the cave and finds the real world, the world above. At first he's blinded by this world because there's a blazing sun and the beautiful things and so on. And so he sees the realities of which these shadows are but of which there are objects or puppets of these real things, that whose shadows are being projected on the screen, because Plato thought there to be three stages of reality: real reality, and then the models of reality or images of reality, and then the shadows of the images, which is the level of consciousness that we exist at. So this is the idea of the Republic. This was 400 years before the time of Yeshua, and this was well known among the philosophers, of whom there were many, but mostly among the Greek philosophers, although there would have been Hellenistic Jews who had read Greek philosophy and were very attracted to it, such as Philo of Alexandria, who was a Greek-speaking Hellenistic Jew of the diaspora, who was contemporary with Yeshua and knew Plato and admired him very much, and interpreted much of his Kabbalistic ideas in terms of Plato. We had what was called the Sacred History, about 300 BC, written by Euhemerus, which describes a fictional island paradise of Panchaea. Now, this is a rational island paradise where things are done by rational meaning rather than by prejudice and by superstition and so on, and supposedly located in the Indian Ocean. And Euhemerus came there by traveling through the Red Sea and around the Arabian Peninsula. In the island's temple of Zeus, Trophilius, he discovered a register of the births and deaths of the gods, proving that they were merely historical figures. In other words, that the deities were really just expanded legends of real humans who had lived at an earlier time. So we don't have a complete uh, texts of this writing of the sacred history. There are several other philosophers and writers that take off on this idea of there being a special place in the islands of the East, the Isles of the Blessed, and so on. They were called the Islands of the Sun by Iambulus, who wrote a lost fictional utopian novel describing the imaginary features and inhabitants of the islands in the East. Uh, Plutarch wrote the life of Lycurgus, a legendary story of the founder of Sparta's society. Now, you remember the Spartans had a very powerful society based on equality among all the citizens and upon military fitness and austerity. So the citizens were trained all to be soldiers. They were trained to be austere like philosophers and highly self-disciplined. And Plutarch describes the story of the founder of Sparta's society. This is about 100 BC. And then Cicero in Rome in about 52 BC writes De Re Publica concerning public things. Is based largely on Plato's ideas, and he discusses the attributes of various types of government: monarchy or aristocracy, democracy, and dictatorship, in an academic manner, but without committing himself to a preference, except to say that the ideal state is one based on reason and justice, where those who possess natural superiority rule over the inferiors. And that was the concept of Plato's Republic. It was an aristocracy. The word aristos means the best. And those who were the most intelligent and the most fit and the healthiest and the most committed to justice and all these other things are the ones who were fit to rule in this society, and the king would be a philosopher king. Plato actually got an opportunity to try to implement this kind of state, and it was a miserable failure. And at this time, before the time of Yeshua, we had the midrashic allegorical teachings of the Jewish sages about the Olam Haba, or the Tikkun Olam, or the Messianic age to come, in which nature would produce fabulous bounty and giant fruits and grains, in contrast to the austere life and resources of a first century Palestinian Jew. The beasts are friendly to humans, who return to the vegetarianism of the Gans Eden, the Garden of Eden, where their people are no longer eating animals, they're friends with animals. It's a theocracy, there's no human king. And the old ideal of Israel, every man under his own fig tree, everyone independent and responsible for his own food, his own well-being, his own defense, and so on, is based on the ideals of the ancient northern kingdom of Israel. After the like the kingdom of Solomon, Israel split into two kingdoms: the kingdom in the north, which is known as Israel, and the kingdom in the south, known as Judah. And the kingdom in the north, after 150 or so on years, was invaded by the Assyrians, and the people were carried off into transplanted exile so that they could not reestablish themselves as a culture to oppose the Assyrians. And the southern nation of Judah survived, and it was those who were taken by mass captivity, the aristocracy and the royal families and the priesthood and the people who were literate were taken to Babylon. However, they were not done like the Assyrians, who took the populations and distributed them throughout so they could not become dominant anywhere and would lose their culture. But the Babylonian Jews were allowed to establish their culture and establish a community and eventually to go back to rebuild the temple and so on. And it was these people who put together what we call the Bible, the Old Testament, from their perspective, the perspective of Judah, the southern kingdom, and the reform of Josiah, and the temple priesthood, because there were originally two temples to Yahweh, one in the northern kingdom, one in the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom was in the city of David, or Jerusalem, and that was who triumphed, and that was who got to write the histories and evaluate them. So the idea was based pretty much on the ideals of the ancient northern Israel, with the later political expression by zealot partisan revolutionaries. And Yeshua, who lived in Nazareth, and his family would have known these concepts and of a theocracy without a human king, with every person individually responsible, and in which there was no class of scribes and Pharisaic rabbis, as there was in the case of Judah and the southern kingdom in Jerusalem, who made their own interpretations and added all kinds of laws to the existing laws. The northern kingdom and Yeshua would have been loyal to the earlier, more prophetic concept of the basis of the laws being justice and compassion and so on. So that's why the Pharisaism of Yeshua's home area, which was in the old northern kingdom of Israel, why that was opposed to the interpretations of the Judean Pharisees, whom Yeshua rather severely criticized for their emphasis on basically liturgical ways of becoming righteous and so on. So the idea before the time of Yeshua of a theocracy was very important in his area. And the idea that in this messianic age to come, God would walk with humanity just as God walked in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. In other words, he was present with them and they could consult with him and so on. That's, by the way, the meaning of the Hebrew word Emmanuel, God is with us, which is given to Yeshua in the Gospel of Matthew. So God walks with humanity as in the Gans Eden, or the Garden of Eden of Genesis, in the Tikkun. Now the Jewish sages did not speculate about a faraway utopian society where everything in the Eastern Isles or something, or they did not try to design a better form of human government, but believed that in spite of all obstacles, a remnant of Israel would eventually bring paradise onto the earth. Now, let's take a look at a comparison of Yeshua's golden age, Yeshua's utopia, and compare it to the Jewish Christian book of Revelations, which was written later, and then later to medieval utopias. So, religious utopias, post-Christian, or that were written in the Christian era, would be the book of Revelations, which was not really accepted into the canon of the New Testament until about 3rd or 4th century. A lot of people felt it was not authentic. However, it probably does contain many very early elements of Jewish Christianity, and that may have been one of the reasons that it was not widely adopted. But in the book of Revelations, a new Jerusalem at the end of all the trials and tribulations, all the birth pangs of Messiah, which go on and on and on, with all kinds of descriptions of the rise of different kind of kingdoms and so on. At the very end, the New Jerusalem, or the city, descends from the sky after all these birth pangs and woes. Quote, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he shall dwell with them, and they shall be his peoples, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God, and he shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, and the first things are passed away." And this is a concept that was developed out of some of the prophecies of Yeshua, out of some of the teachings of Yeshua, and out of other teachings of the Judean Pharisees about the coming of a Messiah who would save Israel and the salvation from damnation and so on. Very not really the teachings of Yeshua, but a kind of mashup of these teachings and other teachings. In the 5th century, Augustine of Hippo writes his City of God. The City of God, it's a very, very long thing, and I won't try to summarize it. You can learn about it if you haven't read it. But the City of God is invisible, it's heavenly, but it's experienced in the church, so that one has a foretaste of this City of God that one day will all people who are faithful will be citizens of this city. And the opposite is the city of the world, which is a dystopia. It's a place of injustice and so on. So this is St. Augustine's take on the utopia of the future. Then we have political utopias, the most famous of being well, some of them being like the De Monarchia by Alighieri in Italy, Dante. He proposed that the ideal Holy Roman Empire would be led by an emperor elected by qualified electors, not by the populace. So he's back to Plato's aristocrats, and who does not owe his title to the Pope. In other words, a vision of a secular political monarchy that was based on justice and so on. Probably the most famous is the book called Utopia by Sir Thomas More, written in the 16th century in England. It's a discussion of the severity of the existing penal code, the gross inequities in the distribution of wealth, the unequal participation in productive labor, and the appropriation of farmlands for sheep grazing. It's kind of like a Bernie Sanders thing. It compares with the system in an imaginary island of utopia, where everyone is employed in a productive trade that results in a 6-hour working day, and the inhabitants alternate between living in the city and the country in 2-year cycles. There's no private property, there's no money, and the inhabitants are free to take from the supply stores whatever food they need. The laws are simple and clear, though, thus there is no need for costly and corrupt lawyers. This spawned later 17th century utopian writings such as Christianopolis by Johann Valentin André. This is the ideal, the Rosicrucian ideal of the ideal political state, in which the citizens use no money or own no property, and thus all on an equal basis economically and socially. Houses, furniture, food, and clothing are provided by the state without any discrimination. Children of school age are reared by the community, and everyone shares equally in work in the fields and in the towns, depending upon their aptitudes as well as in the home. Now, this is all part of the Rosicrucian Renaissance that begins in Germany in the 17th century, early 17th century, And at the time of the Rosicrucian Manifesto and so on, and these ideas, these political ideas, attempted to be realized through through some political uh, princes and an attempt to develop a kingdom like this in a war that unfortunately was lost, and so this ideal never appeared in Europe. Um, if you go to uh, my seminar on the medieval Western mystery tradition, there's quite a section on Rosicrucianism and the political ramifications. Then there are others like the Civitas Solus, the City of the Sun, by Campanella, and in Italy, the New Atlantis by Sir Francis Bacon, the Commonwealth of Oceans by Harrington, the Blazing World, the History of the Savarambians by Varus in France, in which a citizen spoke a world language, something like Esperanto, and the Adventures of Telemachus by Fenelon, and so on. There are many utopias that, as now Europe starts focusing on the idea of something better than a monarchy, and rather than a society of this small number of highly wealthy people who own most of the property, what society should be, and out of this is produced eventually the political ideals that lead to constitutions, monarchical or democratic constitutions, and so on. These all underlay the new political consciousness that produced Freemasonry, that is, symbolic Freemasonry, constitutional and democratic reform, and the new colonial American democracies like the United States and some of those in South America. Voltaire wrote Candide in the 18th century, and Mercier wrote The Year 2440. In these, they proposed a utopia of no organized government or religion, and crime, courts, and prisons are unknown, and everyone lives in harmony and equality. So this is a vision, and of course, you know, the French vision of the discovery of the South Sea Islands and so on, where Gauguin and other French artists went to live and eventually die and are still buried. This romantic impulse, the idea that of uh, uh, the primitive or savage that lives in an ideal and beautiful state, this romantic idea, became very current in the 18th and 19th centuries. Now, all of these promote the ideals of Yeshua's utopian Olam Haba, or Tikkun, or Golden Age, but they led to various 18th, 19th century romantic visions of the return to nature and the primitive societies of the New World, uh, the noble savage, and all that sort of thing. Now, if we take a look at 19th and 20th century analogies to Yeshua's new humanity, there's some very interesting things that come. Sir Edward Bulwer Lytton in 1870 wrote Vril, the Coming Race, or the Power of the Coming Race. The Vril Ya are a peaceful, vegetarian, mystical society without envy, poverty, conflict, or hard work. The women are taller and grander than the men and control everything concerned with reproduction of the species. However, lurking in the darkness is a parallel, unevolved race of primitive savages, and it becomes clear that the Vilya may not always be able to continue their idyllic way of life. So here we have the wheat and the tares. We have a wonderful, advanced society of spiritual humans. However, they're living in the shadow of the constant threat of being overthrown by a barbaric race. It portends the burgeoning of new dystopias. We don't have dystopias appearing in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. But now dystopias, very negative views of the human future, will dominate the 20th and 21st centuries. Visions of a positive human future threatened by a barbaric one, as we have here, or of just the destruction of human civilization. However, during the early 20th century, various theosophical visions of a spiritually evolved human future, and things like the Tibetan Buddhist Shambhala legend, which are somewhat old, but they become known and written about and researched in the early 20th century, and other metaphysical visions of a positive human future begin to gain traction over this these dystopias. Although dystopia becomes the main fare for the 20th century. One we'll look at is the Kalachakra vision of Shambhala. Now, Shambhala is ruled over by Maitreya, the future Buddha. The Kalachakra Tantra prophesies that when the world declines into war and greed and all is lost, as the Hindu vision of dystopia, which is very ancient, for what will happen as the human species degrades into almost monkey-like creatures living in the dark age of that we are now all in, and no one sees any positive outcome for it. But Kalachakra says that as the world declines and all is lost, the 25th Kalki king will emerge from Shambhala with a huge army of spiritually advanced Buddha-like people to vanquish the dark forces and usher in a worldwide golden age. Using calculations from the Kalachakra Tantra, scholars such as Berzin put this date at 2424. You can read about this in this good Wikipedia article. Now, the current Dalai Lama dates the final battle and emergence of the Golden Age at about 300 years from now, which is very close to 2424. He's been encouraging and offering Kalachakra initiation and empowerment to mass gatherings of people all over the world since May 1954, when he initiated 100,000 at a place near Lhasa, Tibet. And he's been doing that ever since. Why? He advocates that Kalachakra is the most appropriate Buddhist Tantra for Westerners. The idea is that he does not teach what he would to true Tibetan Buddhist or Buddhist practitioners. He doesn't teach the generation and completion stage practices, but instead he offers a 6-session guru yoga which prepares the devotees for serious practice in a future lifetime, in a future incarnation. So they have a practice that they do, but the idea is that in a future incarnation they will have achieved enough to be worthy to actually do the generation and completion stages, because Kalachakra is the Tantra, a mother Tantra, that can allow a person to achieve Buddhahood in one lifetime. In the Golden Age, many practitioners, including Westerners, will have generated themselves as Buddhas in one lifetime. And now let's take a look at the 20th to 21st century analogies to Yeshua's new humanity. This is a very interesting one. This is a diary of visions received from a 40th century reincarnation of a 40th century physicist during a year-long coma that a man experienced and was in the hospital in the year 1922. Actually, this the diaries that he wrote were not published anywhere. They were written in German and were kept secret for a long, long, long time, and have only just now been translated into English in the year 2015. So there was a Swiss teacher, Paul Amadeus Denach, and he awakened from a year-long coma with memories of another person, actually his future incarnation, a physicist named Andreas Northam, who lived in the future. Now, Denach is taught what took place for these 2 millennia when the Swiss teacher came out of his narcoleptic coma in 1922. He began writing all his memories from the future that he had gathered over a year in a coma. And later he was struck by tuberculosis and left all his transcripts to his Greek student, and he died at the age of 38. After 44 years, this student, his Greek student, became the dean of the Pantheon University of Athens, and he published, with a lot of reservations, this unique experience, these diaries that were produced by Paul, and they were finally translated into English and published in 2015. There's a long story with this. You can get this now. It's called Chronicles from the Future, the amazing story of Paul Amadeus Denach, and so on. The 20th, 21st, and 22nd centuries, according to this vision of the future, this chronicle of the future, were dominated by materialism, exploitative capitalism, overpopulation, and warfare that destroys species and the environment, and the world language becomes English and Scandinavian. This is for the next 200 years. In the year 2204, the overpopulation was such a serious problem that there was a large-scale colonization of Mars. Now, this is, remember, he's having this vision of all this back in 1922 when people weren't even sure what Mars was. Large-scale colonization of Mars, but after 60 years, an unforeseen weather cataclysm that went on and on in the Martian climate. These disasters killed millions of the colonists, and only a few escaped back to Earth. So the take home from that was, hey, we can't go anywhere. We have to live on this Earth. In the 23rd century, Euro-American people demanded repressive birth control because overpopulation has become is destroying the Earth and the species. And so the Euro-American people, the white people, demanded repressive birth controls from the Asians and the non-whites. And in the year 2309, they caused a thermonuclear war that devastated Europe, except for Scandinavian and Baltic countries, destroyed most continents, and ended the world as we know it. And mass migrations all over the world began to occur of the survivors. Okay, this is your dystopia. In fact, this whole period from the 21st to the 23rd century is dystopia. It's what you would refer to as the birth pangs of Messiah, perhaps. But it's amazing that in the year 1922, this fellow had visions of a thermonuclear war before somebody had even decided what an atom was. By the year 2396, a world government was established, and the calendar was set to year one, starting the world all over again, because the previous world was considered to be barbaric. It was based on greed, profit, and private property, and the survivors did not wish to continue that. In 2894, in the new calendar, that would be the year 498, huge cities and massive energy sources were constructed all over the world that supplied all the needs of people. People had all kinds of scientific ways of communicating and traveling all around the globe without necessity of petrochemicals and things like this. A new social order develops in which all youth aged 17 to 19 serve the state at chosen kinds of work, after which they are free to have partners, sexual partners. There's no marriage, or to just enjoy life or to serve in higher functions. And those who choose to serve in areas of medicine, education, religion, and the religion consists of advanced forms of all religions and priesthoods that exist at this time still, etc. These people have a higher status and they get bigger homes, but all people are free to follow their own ways, and they are described as being much more naive or innocent than 20th century people, but have far greater abilities and intelligence. The world capital is somewhere in Northern Europe called Rosendal. Now, this is just a summary. This is a massive book. It's got a huge lectionary and definitions of the words that are used and so on. Not long after that, there was a thing called the movement of the 200. 200 people created institutes to expand human consciousness and psychic abilities using meditation and other means, and in their year 986, which would be our year 3382, the Great Awakening is achieved by Alexis Volki, a person who lives, and he makes this breakthrough, a Great Awakening, becomes enlightened in a different way, way beyond anything of what we think of as Buddhist enlightenment or anything like that. And this consciousness spreads almost immediately over 26 hours from the 200 to all humanity in general. So it's like a very, very fast 100th monkey. It just goes. It's like Barbara Marx Hubbard's idea of a critical mass being achieved, and suddenly consciousness makes a huge leap. And this results in what is called supervision, which is the word really probably should be divided as supervision, which is an ability far beyond psychic or clairvoyant powers. It's full enlightenment, or what is called Nebelwirch, in communion with the light or universal intelligence of all being, which is known as the Samuth. This would be equivalent to Yeshua's idea of the Abba. And this is the end of Homo sapiens. It's the beginning of a new spiritual humanity known as Hominis Occidentalis Novus. 100 years later at Easter, which is the year 3482, a 70-year-old man named Kostya Rundeloff has been working for years to create a new species of blue rose. But this is not just a normal rose. This is kind of a Rosicrucian idea, I suppose, of a rose that confers the highest consciousness possible. It's incredibly beautiful, and when anybody looks at this blue rose, they're immediately transformed. And it can be grown only at the Rosendal by people with the highest consciousness, and it gives them the highest forms of supervision. Now, this is a detailed vision of the emergence of a new humanity in their golden age, and these beings can eventually travel through space and time, not in clunky mechanical flying saucers or anything like that, but telepathically. And now I'm going to tell you about Barbara Marx Hubbard, who is known as BMH, and her teachings of humanity ascending. This is a contemporary interpretation of Yeshua's vision of the new humanity. I clandestinely consecrated a BMH to the independent episcopate in the early 1980s, privately at Bishop Rosamond Miller's Gnostic Center sanctuary years ago. She had been basically sent over to me by a bishop in Santa Barbara, a remarkable man who had fallen in love with her writings and her interpretations of the book of Revelations. And Barbara was not a Christian. She came from an agnostic Jewish family, uh, the who founded the Mattel toy company, and were quite wealthy. Uh, she became a candidate for Democratic vice president in 1984, proposing an office for a positive future to counter the hopelessness of young people that was being promoted by all the 20th century spate of dystopic science fiction movies and other negative influences that showed a negative future and destruction of humanity, Third World War, all this sort of thing. This stuff still goes on. This is what we have on television programs and Hunger Games and uh, science fiction movies and all this sort of thing. It's visions of a dystopic future. Now, her first book was an interpretation of the book of Revelations. Her newest book, which is many decades later, builds on the great themes in the New Testament, such as Jesus' statement, "You will do the works that I do, and greater works will you do in the fullness of time." And St. Paul, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, we shall be changed." And she interprets these in terms of a coming new humanity. She says, "These statements are coming true. The promise is being kept. We are all being changed. We do have the power of what we called gods. We can destroy the world, and we also can restore the earth, evolve ourselves and all of society." This is her most recent book. It's called The Evolutionary Testament of Co-Creation. It's sort of her term, co-creation, being co-creators with God, being co-stewards. Uh, and this is the concept of the Bayanash. This is the concept of the new humanity who receives sovereignty from Godhead. Uh, you might want to check out her video called Humanity Ascending, which is a story of consciousness and its evolution uh, from the beginnings of the physical universe, the tiniest forms, until modern evolution in human consciousness. So here's a link for that. It's very similar to my description in the Pneumaticon of the evolution of consciousness from the tiniest elements of the universe into biological consciousness and human consciousness, so on. Deepak Chopra says, "Barbara Marx Hubbard has become the voice for conscious evolution in our times. The fate of humanity in the world now depends on survival of the wisest." In this video, she elegantly explains how the universe is becoming self-aware through the human nervous system. In this self-awareness lie the raw materials of intention and a new imagination that will propel us from being human to superhuman. And it is the story we tell, it is the imagination, it is the vision that we create of a positive future that creates the positive future. Our storyteller, says one person who reviews the book, says, "Our storyteller, Barbara Marx Hubbard, provides the unique perspective of viewing our history through what she terms as evolutionary eyes, as the unfoldment of a 14 billion year journey of transformation that is now pressing us forward to give birth to a new, never before seen universal humanity. This compelling vision of hope sees us at an evolutionary edge where the old world is dying and the new world emerging." Now, I want to remind you that Barbara Marx Hubbard is not technically a Christian. She's from a Jewish family. She's really, like me, very much in her heart a New Ager, a person who is committed to the transformation of humanity. BMH proclaims that we can choose to develop human utopia, that is, good place, the golden age, at a golden age by achieving a quantum shift, as she calls it, of consciousness through a process of will and a critical mass of consciousness of enough people who make themselves wise and develop their consciousness without further prolongation of dystopia and planetary catastrophe. Yeshua's birth pangs of Messiah, in other words, is passing away, and we have the choice to continue that process and bring the full evolution through. So this is similar to the process through which Alexis Volkey's awakening to enlightenment occurs in the Chronicles from the Future, although I do not think Barbara Marx Hubbard ever saw the Chronicles from the Future. She saw only her ways of reading the English New Testament. If you want to check her out in Wikipedia, here's the link. It says, as an author, speaker, and co-founder and president of the Foundation for Conscious Evolution, she posits that humanity now as never before is on the threshold of a quantum leap if we are able to integrate newly emergent scientific, social, and spiritual capacities. We could transform ourselves to move beyond our current global crises to a magnificent future equal to our vast potential. To this I will add one personal experience I had with Barbara. When she was up here for me to consecrate her, we stopped at the studio of a gentleman who was a very spiritual person, who also was a person who operated electronic machines to chart people's brain waves. And at that time, it would look mostly at alpha, beta, gamma, and delta and theta waves. And the deepest form of meditation was considered to be delta waves, possibly theta waves, which people are in when they're in a sleep that's dreamless that they'll awake from. And considered to be the deepest form of meditation. Now, it takes people a long time to get into that deep form of meditation. But when we put Barbara onto the machine and asked her to meditate, within about 10 seconds she was in deep delta and theta, which is unheard of. People just don't do that. So he was very impressed, and so was I. So Barbara is a person who is able to see through the New Testament back to what Yeshua was really talking about. She's a person who is in contact with very high consciousness, and a person that I think very highly of. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my view that Yeshua's new world and new humanity are continuing to emerge. They have been from the time he announced it. And they're continuing to do so at an ever accelerating pace. Things are happening in the 21st century and even in the 20th century. What took hundreds of years to develop in human consciousness at earlier times, medieval times, occurs in 15 or 20 years. And in the 21st century, with the kind of communications we have, consciousness grows at an even faster rate than what would have taken centuries before can take 5 years in the 21st century or less. So many of the sayings of Yeshua, the Malkuth is spread out upon the earth and men do not see it. The Malkuth is like a mustard seed that slowly grows and becomes the largest of all plants, or it's like the unnoticed growth of other plants that a man plants and doesn't watch, and slowly they grow up and they come into being. All kinds of allegories that he gave about what the Malkuth, the so-called kingdom, is like. The Malkuth is like a field of wheat and tares. The good and the bad grow up together and they continue. So Yeshua's view was not an eschatological view that the end of the world was immediately at hand. What was immediately at hand was the birth pangs of Messiah, and the eventual outcome would be the harvest, which would be the coming of the new humanity and the new age, and that firmly established on earth. Now, humanity has been on a new path of conscious evolution since about 500 BC uh, because of the stories and visions of transformation taught by Gautama, Buddha, Jesus called Christ, and others, and that other forms of spirituality that existed about human transformation. There's an interesting saying in Luke's gospel that's not really translated correctly if you look at the Greek, and if you go back to the Aramaic. It says something like this: I have come to cast a sacred flame upon the earth, but what if it is already kindled? That's translated incorrectly very often, but I wish it were already kindled, or something like that. But that's not what it says, and that's not what he said. And obviously, he would have considered John the Baptist to have kindled this flame, if no one else, and it was therefore already kindled. But it was already kindled also in Buddhism and in other forms of spirituality that existed previous to Yeshua's time. And I think this is an acknowledgement that Yeshua was building upon a consciousness that was already being taught, a path of consciousness that is new for humanity. Now, the teachings of Hinduism, which became Buddhism, and Judaism, which became Christianity, and so on, were the frameworks for medieval and modern cultural values in the East and in the West. But it was the Christian vision of Yeshua that shaped the emergent Euro-American forms of secular moral and spiritual values that have influenced global humanism. Yeshua was a humanist. This is a very important thing to understand now that there are so many fundamentalists who hate humanism. But his ideas were humanistic, and that's what he taught. Now, even in the New Testament, those humanistic ideas come through. In my online book with interactive media links entitled The New Humanity, I published in 2010, I wrote, we are not the same humanity that we were 2,000 years ago. The ancient patriarchies are disappearing and women are achieving full equality with men. Imperial monarchies and dictatorships are giving way to democratic republics. Science, medicine, and technology have advanced to levels that would have been considered miraculous in the ancient world. The human soul and spirit have evolved. We are entering a secular, post-religious age that is synthesizing a global spirituality. We are a new kind of humanity. So that was the premise of my book. So in this book I show the many ways that Yeshua's vision of the new humanity, which was not accurately transmitted in Christianity, has nevertheless inseminated the noosphere of human consciousness through the spiritual power of its prophet to bring forth global humanistic consciousness that continues to overcome the atavistic and regressive patriarchal mentality of the old humanity and will ultimately usher in a new golden age, a new humanity with responsible stewardship over a new heavens and a new earth. For a $10 or greater patronage per lecture, you will receive PDF files not only of all my books featured in the series, but you'll also get access to my online multimedia book entitled The New Humanity, The Forgotten Kabbalistic Teachings of Yeshua and the Evolution of Global Spirituality. Please click on the Patreon link in my description just below the video to become a patron, helping to sponsor my new videos on the pre-Christian teachings of Yeshua. Thank you.